Before rockets burst their way into the sky, we had never seen what the Earth looked like from above. The original astronauts were the first people ever to view our entire planet in one glance.
Hello, you'd have to see this planet to believe it.
One of their first thoughts was how the Earth looked exactly like a globe. The oldest globe still in existence today was made in 1492, long before we had satellites, rockets, or even planes. How did they do it? How did they manage to accurately map out the entire planet without ever leaving the ground?
Let's see here. We have to get to here before nightfall, which means we have to follow the east side of that ridge.
So if they didn't have any maps, how did they find their way around? Give me that.
What do you do? What'd you do that for?
Don't worry, we're gonna make our own map.
Make our own map, Persis? We're in the middle of nowhere. We're gonna die. We're gonna get stranded. What?
Come on, let's get started.
But the...
If you look at early maps, you'll notice they were more artistic than scientific. Old maps often had drawings of dragons and strange human forms in the unknown lands and waters. When a map maker wrote, "Here be headless men," people actually believed him. So how did the early map makers replace these monsters and dragons with actual locations of mountain ranges, rivers, and lakes? Did they run around and measure everything?
Can you hold this, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Maybe I should tell Mike that they'd still be mapping the world today if they used this method. Hey, Mike, I've got something in my knapsack that's going to make your job a lot easier.
A map?
No, a triangle.
A triangle? What are we going to use that for?
Those early map makers may not have known anything about planes and rockets, but they knew a thing or two about triangles. One useful property they discovered was that if you know the length of one side and at least 2 angles of a triangle, then you can calculate the length of the other 2 sides without actually having to measure them.
So how does that help us?
Well, think about it. This rock, that tree over there, that cliff way in the distance, they form a triangle. If we could figure out the length of one side of this triangle and at least 2 angles, then we could figure out the rest of the triangle.
How are we going to do that?
Well, we already know the distance from the rock to the tree. You measured it, 130 meters.
Right.
Well, we'll call that the baseline. Now all we have to do is measure the distance to the cliff.
Oh, don't make me walk all the way over there, please.
Don't worry, you don't have to. For the next step, the early map makers use an older version of this, a theodolite. It's a device that measures angles. You look through the telescope and line up your object. Once it's lined up, you can determine the angle by reading the scale. First, we use the theodolite to measure the angle from the rock to the cliff. It's 65 degrees. Then we measure the angle from the tree to the cliff. That's 45 degrees. Now all it takes is a few simple calculations to figure out the length of the other 2 sides of the triangle. So now we know the distance from the tree to the cliff and the rock to the cliff, and we never had to move a muscle. This method of surveying the landscape is known as triangulation. But that's not all. If we measure the angles to other landmarks, we can use the side of one of our existing triangles to create a new baseline. And once we've done that, we can triangulate using common baselines and theoretically spread out across the entire planet.
Wow, we could map this entire area without ever moving from our baseline.
And that's how the early map makers did it. They moved from area to area, forming triangles, eventually allowing them to map the entire country. You can still see evidence of those early surveys today. The countryside is littered with small round discs, like this one, called benchmarks. It marks the corner of a triangle of an early survey. You can find benchmarks just about anywhere, embedded in the side of a building, the side of a cliff, on virtually any permanent object. Engraved on the benchmark is a code which will tell you the elevation as well as the approximate longitude and latitude of the spot. So if you happen to stumble across one of these, you can tell exactly where on the planet you are. Today, the primary tools for map making are aerial photography and satellites. Satellites that orbit the Earth transmit pictures which are used mainly to monitor changes in the Earth's surface. Because of their distance from Earth, satellites aren't very practical for detailed map making. For that, we use aerial photography. With aerial photographs, the plane flies back and forth across the land, taking pictures. These pictures are then viewed through an instrument called a stereoplotter. The stereoplotter transfers the information directly into a computer, which translates the image into maps that are ready for printing. But this ability to get off the ground didn't mean the end for triangulation. In fact, triangulation is still used today. That's exactly what these people on the side of the highway are doing. They're measuring distances for roads, tunnels, and other civil engineering work. Modern surveyors use an instrument called a total station, which is basically a high-tech version of the older theodolite.
Okay, Persis, I understand all this modern stuff. But on some of the old maps I've seen, they actually have elevations. Now, if they couldn't get off the ground back then, how could they measure the height of that cliff?
Well, Mike...
Oh, I knew it. I knew this triangulation thing was too good to be true.
Mike, where are you going?
To measure the height of the cliff.
What I was trying to say was that to measure the height of the cliff, you can still use triangulation. All you have to do is turn your triangle on its side. And now you can use it to measure elevation.
Hey, Persis! I kind of forgot the tape measure. Can you, bring it up, please?